I was just talking with Audra this morning and I just cracked myself up because I caught a glimpse of myself in the camera and I thought, oh my gosh, have I been wearing the same clothes for 3 days? Please don't let it be so. All I can say in my own defense is that it's below zero, there's snow coming out of the sky, and the wind is blowing. So I'm in layers.
Oh gosh. Well, I don't know if you can hear me, but I've only had 1 cup of coffee, so I'm going to set everybody's expectations correctly. I haven't even finished that first cup of coffee. So
all right. Well,
a little earlier here in Seattle.
It is a little earlier. We've got some West Coast folks there, and we've got some Hawaii folks. So it might not be as early for you as it is for some others. So let me just say, by way of introduction quickly, that Audra is a cook, writer, and photographer who's putting good food in the spotlight and changing the way you look at farming and the food on your plate. She is the founder of the Female Farmer Project, a multi-platform documentary project that chronicles the rise of women working in agriculture around the world, from in-depth stories, personal essays, photographic portraits, a podcast, and in-development documentary film. The project gives a powerful voice to the fastest growing demographic in agriculture, the female farmer. So who better to have here to help close us out this morning than somebody who's seen it up close and personal through the eyes of an artist and a fantastic photographer. So Audra, thank you so much for being here.
Gosh, thank you for inviting me. I mean, I'm no Barbara Rader, but I have interviewed her and I have a podcast featuring her. So if anybody wants to dig in my website and scroll back a little bit, you'll find a podcast with her talking about how they approached this census. And so hopefully we'll be able to do a part 2 with the new numbers.
Hopefully, yes. And now do you want to bring your presentation up and share your screen?
I'll share my screen. And are you guys seeing my here?
You have to take me up here. There, perfect.
All right. I start with a white screen just so that so everybody should be seeing a white screen. Okay. Well, it's interesting, and heard you talking about, while I do that with images and essays, like you said, it doesn't always have to be that way. You can also tell and amplify a woman's story by introducing her, by echoing what she says in a meeting to make sure that her thoughts are heard. Amplifying each other as sisters has got to be a priority for us. So I'll tell you some stories about women and why I do that. I do very much believe in the power of amplifying the voices of female farmers and telling their stories, because I believe that a story creates a stepping stone for understanding and demands space and an overarching narrative. A story rewires us for the empathy to make change. "5 years ago, I was standing in the middle of a farmer's market when I noticed something. Behind every single table was a woman. It was like they were suddenly visible to me. I mean, why hadn't this occurred to me before? These women who grow vegetables and raise animals and make cheese, they were the stewards of my local economy. And they were quietly addressing the issues of hunger and accessibility to fresh produce for the most vulnerable people in my community. They were also the landowners in my community, and yet I never really thought about them. It made me wonder what was going on and wondered if my community was unique. So I went to the library to dig deeper. And yes, I am that kind of nerd who notices a bunch of women at the farmer's market and follows it up with a visit to the library. I checked out books. I studied the governmental statistics, which were pretty grim. And what I discovered was this: that women produce more than half of the food grown worldwide, but only receive about 5% of agricultural services and own about 2% of farmland. Of the 2.1 million farms in the United States, only 14% have a woman as a primary operator. Across the business sector, about 29% of America's business owners are women. So even when we are looking at farms as a business, it's pretty far behind the curve, or the numbers are wrong. We're not sure because we think that the 2012 Census of Agriculture was asking the wrong questions. But from my observations of my own farming community, it was different. I mean, where I live here in Western Washington, it's mostly women-owned operations. So I thought, okay, maybe there's something special going on, or maybe there's been a shift, or maybe I've even been conditioned to think of men as farmers. But I noticed something else when I was at the library, that women were missing from the visual narrative. I couldn't find them in books, I couldn't find them in art, or even in Google search. Even though women had always been there, media had left them behind, and there was no modern storytelling going on. Over the past 50 years, the average American has become 3 generations removed from agriculture, without a farmer in the family or even a farm in the neighborhood. And in that time, the stereotypical image of a farmer was created. It's often an older white man, lacking in education, wearing overalls and a cowboy hat with oat straw between his teeth. He's popular in storybooks and on children's TV shows. He teaches lessons about work ethic. If a female character appears in these simplistic rural stories, she's old and stoic, referred to as the farmer's wife, and completely without a story of her own. To encourage this white male caricature of a farmer is to erase the historical and present-day impact of millions of farmers and farm workers, and to ignore the diversity of gender, race, and education that has always existed among farmers in this country. And so I had decided I was going to do something about it. I decided I was going to resist that white male narrative of the United States agriculture and illuminate the female farmers who have been left out of the story. I celebrate that women have always farmed. They have slogged through pig stalls, driven the combine, kept diligent farm records, bred and slaughtered livestock, saved seed and marketed their product. Additionally, they've been tireless organizers pushing against sexism in their industry, fighting against harmful farm policies, innovating on and off the farm. Really, I just wanted to make the invisible visible. But there was a problem. How? You see, I wasn't a photographer and I wasn't a writer. So I borrowed a camera, I got a 15-minute lesson, and I got started photographing farmers. And it very quickly went from this small photography project to being published globally. And I found myself traveling around the world to meet these women in their fields and in their milking parlors. And I show you this slide because I like big results. And this is a big result. I mean, most of these outlets are not known for their agricultural coverage. I mean, we're really bearing witness to a revolution where we're seeing agricultural storytelling happening in these types of magazines. I mean, Billboard, who knew? The USDA only began tracking gender statistics in 1978. So women farmers were not even counted until 1978. So what policies were not enacted? What grants not provided? What loans were not given? And sadly, what farmers quit because they were unable to make traction in an environment that didn't even count them. That year in 1978, women accounted for approximately 5% of the principal farm operators in the United States. It wasn't until 1981 that the estate laws changed to allow a widow to inherit the land from her deceased spouse without paying an inheritance tax. Because farm women were considered helpers instead of farmers, and not regularly included in the business documents or land deeds, widowed female farmers were forced to prove their essential role in the farm operation or pay a hefty inheritance tax. So before 1981, many widowed female farmers were forced to sell off their land to avoid the tax. So I think between those two things, these laws changing and then women farmers actually starting to be counted, from 1982 to 2007, we saw the amount of women-owned operations nearly triple. But the USDA statistics and data are insufficient. It's not a complete record of the role of women in American agriculture. I mean, like I said, women's names were routinely left off of those bank loans and land titles and business documents, equipment purchases, and so on. So today, we are seeing what happens when women are missing. Female farmers now have more trouble gaining access to financial assistance, but statistically, they're at better credit risk. In general, they make less money than male farmers, and more than half of America's female farmers supplement their income with off-farm jobs. So when I analyzed the statistics, I had no choice but to read between the lines, because the statistics are inherently skewed. When the only available data is problematic and gender biased, it's impossible to design policies that reflect the true demographic of farmers or to create appropriate paths for accessing financing, land, and training resources. And it's impossible to track progress, which is why I'm so excited about what Barbara did with this most recent census. It would be really exciting to see these numbers. Farming does not respect personal boundaries, exhaustion levels, or breaking points. It is a lifestyle filled with beauty and emergencies, and all the coinciding human emotions. A farmer cannot ever fully leave her farm. Anastasia admits to needing solitude, even craving it in times of high stress. But isolation has created its own challenges. There is no one to depend on, no one to help with the chores. Anastasia has fought to acquire knowledge: agronomy, lease writing, marketing, animal husbandry. She calls it the school of hard knocks, a school I'm sure a few of us are familiar with. Just down the road from Anastasia lives Jo. She and her husband George opened George's Custom Meat Shop in the 1970s. George passed away about 5 years ago, and Jo and Anastasia have created a close friendship, these women living on the range alone. They look out for one another. They butcher turkeys and hogs together. Anastasia has begun unofficially apprenticing with Jo. She's desperate to soak up that slaughtering and butchering knowledge. And Jo, seeing potential in Anastasia, wants to transfer her skill set, her tools, perhaps even her entire business. They've talked about partnership opportunities or creative financing so Anastasia could reopen George's. But the day before our visit, her well failed for the first time in its history. There is worry in Anastasia's voice and anger. I mean, what will they do out here without water to drink, to cook, to grow gardens, to water the livestock, if they cannot get a loan to drill a deeper well for water? And what will happen to the land value? If there is no water, what's the point? Should Jo and Anastasia leave their land and abandon their plans, it's a loss that extends to the entire community. It's a missed opportunity for the transference of knowledge and skill, a loss that's impossible to quantify. And as you know, small operations like this, with them disappearing, they create a bottleneck. And there is an update to this story. Anastasia did close down her operation, and Jo sold her land and moved to Ohio to live with her son and his family. As a child growing up in Seoul, South Korea, Young spent summers in her cousin's melon and tomato patch outside of the city. Away from urban life, she encountered a quieter world. She sunk her hands into the dirt, ate tomatoes right out of the fields. It was the 1960s, a decade after the end of the Korean War. Ingredients and refrigeration were scarce. Young learned to cook from scratch from her mother, to ferment and preserve foods, to stretch meals in order to feed their family of 9. After earning an accounting degree in Chicago, Young moved to Tucson with her family and her 2 sons to become a full-time farmer. The farm has been the center of the universe, another member of the family, and most of the important decisions have been made in alignment with the needs of the farm. The balance is tricky. The essence of their farm, she says, has been the hard work and role of each person, including the kids. Still, the farm is a demanding family member. There's always endless work, says Young. We're always behind the 8 ball, and there's always a million things to do. It can gobble you up. This will be Chanel's first season as a farmer. She is urban farming in the most ethnically diverse zip code in the United States. She believes there is a stigma around people of color growing food, but that they still feel very nostalgic about it. By farming in the public gaze, her mission is to connect people of color back to the land and to connect with growing food and to leading healthy lives. Kylie remembers a day like it was yesterday. It was when her father sold everything and retired from farming. She can still feel the emotional impact of knowing that he had lost his livelihood, even though she didn't understand the reasons. After high school, she attended the local community college to become a nurse. But when she became a single mom at 19, she quit school and found work with a seed sales company. Then one day, out of the blue, she decided she was done selling seed and she wanted to farm. She pursued one of her seed accounts for a growing contract for potatoes. And surprising everyone, they gave her a shot and awarded her the contract. It was so surprising, in fact, that she didn't have anything ready. She didn't even have land. So she scrambled, she found land, and she got started. And looking back, she shakes her head at how crazy that was. I mean, jumping in with both feet like that, especially as a single mom. But she had made the choice and was willing to do the work to make it happen. Kylie is creative, and she looks for just the right land, ones that have lied fallow, have water rights and power. She pays cash leases and grows mostly by contract. She grows some cattle feed that she direct markets to local beef producers, and all the while she's building a marketplace for her private label for her potatoes. She and I met up recently at the Othello John Deere, and we jumped in her truck for a tour. Her back seat was filled with car seats and empty juice boxes and kid toys while we drove around to her different lease lots. One was growing silage and the other one was home to butternut squash for a baby food company. She has plans to grow blueberries on her latest lease land. And we visited her pinto bean field to check the beans to see if they were dry enough to combine. She was really proud of her bean crop. But after I left, the weather turned and the area received record rainfall and her crop was ruined. Weather isn't her only challenge, though. She struggles with things like the mechanics of her circles and pumps. The pumps run a lot of high-volt electricity to get the water into the circles, and it's dangerous if you don't fully understand it, and she doesn't. Being used to doing everything on her own, she says it was a hard lesson to learn to ask for help. She recently married and is now mother to 4 children under the age of 6. Kylie says she has the best of both worlds of being able to be a work-at-home mom and self-employed. But she says it's not all rainbows and daisies. Some days those worlds collide and they collide hard. We talked a lot about the balancing of motherhood with entrepreneurship and how she struggles to find her groove and temper her ambition. She says it's just a full-time job to maintain the farms she has. She really wants to do more and more. Idzai immigrated to San Diego from her native Zimbabwe in 2002 as a refugee with her husband and 4 daughters. Her first order of business was to find land to farm and a good school for the girls. She got her start through the International Rescue Committee with a 30 by 40 foot garden plot. Now she farms 4 lots of folks who lease her their backyards. She told me as we were walking to the back of the house to see one of those backyards that it was winter and that her farm was brown. I really had to laugh because this is her version of brown. She hasn't seen a Seattle farm in the winter. I laughed when I saw this, and I think that's pretty green. Before her farming day begins, she drives an airport shuttle bus starting at 4 a.m. and has put all her daughters through college with her farming income. Annie is the founder of the first rooftop farm in New York City. She remains an urban farmer because she believes farming right in the public gaze is the best way to share a complete story of how food is grown. When I asked Annie what her biggest challenge was, she surprised me. She said it's consumerism and apathy. She says ignorance is not bliss, it's disempowerment. And finding articulate and compelling ways to share this position is my most and least favorite challenge, depending on how much sleep I've gotten. Also, sunburn and a healthy fear of Lyme disease. I met Michelle, a fourth-generation farmer in the middle of the day, in the middle of a field. To the left were sunflowers, and to the right, golden barley, as far as the eye could see. And then it was abruptly interrupted by this incredible, big Montana sky. For as long as she could remember, she told everyone she wanted to be a farmer and a diesel mechanic. She admits that she's a pretty lousy mechanic. After high school, she went off to college and pursued a career and was climbing the corporate ladder. Then one day she received a call. It was her dad. He wanted to talk about dreams and careers. And then he asked her what her dream job was. She didn't hesitate. It's always been to be a farmer. So she gave up the security, the stock options, health insurance, paid vacation. It all sounds lovely, doesn't it? And left it all to farm the 6,000-acre family farm. I asked her who her mentors were, and she listed them off. Travis, Ryan, Tony, Les, Mitchell, Bart. And I realized none of them were women. One day she got a phone call from a neighbor who asked to buy a bushel of corn. She said, sure, come on over, I'll load it in your truck for you. And he said, well, I'd rather do business with your father. So she said, that's fine, you can do that, but you still have to write the check out to me because I own the corn. Michelle is the first woman on the Montana Grain Growers Executive Board and was recently elected their first woman president. And while she, like Kylie, struggles with balancing ambition with family and farm, I will not be surprised if we see her as the national president within a few years. Stephanie contracted Lyme disease while serving our nation in the Coast Guard. It went undiagnosed for many years and left her so ill that she had to sit for up to 6 hours a day on an IV. Her doctor recommended that she eat as much fresh fruit and vegetables as possible. And that's when she realized that downtown San Diego was devoid of any accessible fresh produce. So while she sat there on her IV, she studied county policies and regulations and designed and plotted an urban farm. And as she regained health and strength, she began to build it, slowly but very surely, one box at a time, employing only veterans along the way. Now her small urban farm employs up to 4 veterans and provides free fresh vegetables to several homeless veteran families. As a former Capitol Hill journalist, Suzanne passionately loved politics and her participation in the representative government. She wanted to help change the world. It was intellectualism as sport, until several events caused her to question her previously unexamined ideals and lack of connection to the land that she so dearly loves. She quit her job and quite literally dropped out. And then later she bought a dairy cow, Greeley, who became both the impetus and the beginning of her farming career. The life that Suzanne has created may appear to be drastically different from the outside. I mean, there's no longer any suits or heels and no prestigious bylines. But as I spent the day with her, seeing my first calf birth, collecting eggs, feeding and watering the herd, I see that it's a life that she approaches each day with as much careful thought, passion, and energy as she did her Capitol Hill days. But now she hopes her ideas and ideals will change the world from the ground up. Karen is a personal hero of mine. I visited her one day on this rainy Sunday in the South Bronx at the farmer's market. Now, there was no real convenient train service to go see her. And so I had to take, I think it was an Uber or a Lyft at the time. And from the back seat of that car, I could see all of the corner markets advertising their hot dog and soda specials. And that was my first experience in seeing that there could be a struggle with access to fresh fruit and vegetables and foods when the finest dining was just a few miles away. But Karen had a vision, and almost an impossible dream, that against all these odds and restrictions, that she would have all these people growing food in the empty lots in her neighborhood. And she actually made it happen. And some of these women in her gardening posse are ladies in their 80s. But she needed to get these fruit and vegetables into the hands of the people of her community. So she started this farmers market. And they have a mission that if you come to market hungry, you will not leave market hungry. Karen retired from her job as a physical therapist and now farms full-time. And at age, I'd say she's now, 68? She's just getting started. She's incredible. Shamie and her twin sister Jamie are members of the Tohono O'odham Nation and farmers at the 860-acre San Javier Co-op farm just south of Tucson. In 2007, after earning a degree in fine arts, Shamie found a job at the San Javier Co-op farm. She learned to plant gourds and corn and how to clean and dry temporary beans. Year after year, she learned new skills, driving tractors and managing irrigation, cutting hay. I always say I fell into this, but it really opened my creative outlet as well, Shamie says. In my paintings, I use what I see here on the farm. Jamie also began working at the farm, growing and preparing food to be sold on the T.O. Nation and in Tucson. Of her relationship to agriculture, Jamie says, farming is a love-hate relationship. Sometimes I love it, sometimes I hate it, but I gravitate towards it. It pulls me back. Ruth is originally from Eastern Washington and raised around gardening by her master gardener father. Lori studied at Cordon Bleu in London and studied cheesemaking while living in France. Between the two of them, they had the skills needed, and in 2002, the siren call of farming proved to be too irresistible. They began to incubate their farm and test drive their business on a cousin's 1.5-acre lot in downtown Bellevue, Washington, which is quite urban, while both working for an accounting software firm. And like so many first-generation women farmers today, they left their comforts of their technology sector careers for the volatile yet incredibly rewarding farm business. Their little farm did well, and with that experience in hand, they took their nest egg and headed east. In 2008, they found 21 acres in Tieton, and in 2009 started building the structures they needed to start the farm. On May 1st in 2010, they opened their doors and launched their first cheese. Unfortunately, 2010 was also the midpoint of the economic downturn, and Ruth and Lori found they were unable to build and expand as quickly as they had hoped and planned. At one time, Ruth was able to pick up consultant work, but that too disappeared with the downturn. This forced the farm to be financially self-sufficient, and in real terms, that means very long hours of hard labor for both. Hiring help on the farm was just not financially an option. Their workload remains their biggest challenge. There are long work days of chores and making cheese and running the business, as well as the long drive to Western Washington to make deliveries to stores, restaurants, and farmers markets. Balancing farm and any recreation seems to have just disappeared. Lori tells me that they have no time for so many things that they have lost count. Despite these early setbacks and a couple of tragic barn fires along the way, they are continuing to grow both the business and expand their capacity. And the tide is turning for small farms like Tieton. Through direct sales at markets and having their product featured at high-end restaurants throughout the Seattle area, people are becoming aware of the incredible flavor that comes from farmstead handcrafted cheese. They are well poised for the future. Jen is the chief agricultural officer of the largest rooftop farm in the world. It was my first visit to a rooftop farm, and as I climbed the stairs to the roof, I couldn't help but think about how different it would be. I mean, first of all, I've never actually climbed stairs to a farm. But even though we walked the rows of concrete instead of dirt, she stopped to taste her crop. And that is something that I have seen every single farmer do. She told me about the time that she spent in Arizona and the Antarctica. Antarctica. I'm not going to say it. I'm sorry. One cup of coffee. Developing hydroponic systems in order to grow food in places where it sometimes doesn't. Her systems are light enough to build on rooftops, and that's what she's done in New York and Chicago. Combined, they make up about 4 acres of growing space. And like all farms, they're solar powered, but hers maybe just a little bit differently. And unlike other farmers, she does control the weather, sometimes from an app on her phone. Johanna owns and operates an Icelandic farm that's been in her family for generations. She's born and raised on this land, as were her 6 children and now her grandchildren. But a combination of forces threaten to make her farm as extinct as the breed of goats that she raises. This is the only commercial and breeding goat farm in Iceland, and it works specifically one of the world's oldest and rarest breed of goats, the Iceland goat. For years, the breed has been teetering on the verge of extinction. Population had fallen to less than 90 animals worldwide, and feeling as if she had to do something to prevent the breed's collapse, she left her successful career as a nurse and focused her energy on saving the breed. Now, thanks in part to her efforts, there are over 800 Icelandic goats scattered on farms across the globe. Johanna has worked nonstop to create public awareness and to create a new market for goat meat, their cashmere wool, and dairy products. There she just milked the goat, and we drank that milk with our coffee. But the financial situation became dire, and Iceland, along with the rest of the world, suffered a banking crisis in 2008. And this was more of that fallout. She was going to have to send the farm to auction and the goats to slaughter. Enter in the Game of Thrones. You see, this handsome goat is somewhat of a TV star. He was eaten by one of Khaleesi's dragons. And with some creative problem solving, she launched a crowdfunding campaign, and the fans of the show stepped up. They saved her farm and raised enough money for her to build a creamery so that she could build a sustainable business for the goats. Losing the farm could have meant the loss of Johanna's considerable breeding expertise, as well as nearly half of the world's populations of Icelandic goats. But for Johanna, that loss ran deeper, as it also meant losing the family farm and a way of life that's also rapidly becoming extinct. Earlier, I said that I believe that storytelling rewires us for the empathy to make change, because I believe we are all held together by that same narrative thread. So I told you stories of women who created community and ones that paved the path for today's female farmers. And there were stories of water and seeds and of soil and saving breeds. I didn't mean to rhyme that. I shared the stories of successful entrepreneurs and of those who failed. I told you stories of diversity, of mentorship, and farm succession, of women who use their wide and varied skills, some in technology and others their ability to nurture, but both to grow food. I tell these women's stories to make the case for diversity and for mentorship and the need for women to be in leadership roles. But their stories dramatize the real and deeper story of generations of women's roles and voices being suppressed. With the Female Farmer Project, my intention was to create a narrative of American agriculture that centers around the stories and contributions of female farmers, and to assert that female farmers are essential in the imagining and implementation of our future food system. But I'm also very concerned about the historical representation of women in agriculture and the stories that have gone untold. And even though we women represent 50% of the population, we only occupy about 1/2 of 1% of written history. That's 0.5% for those of you who do better with numbers. And that's a super frustrating number for me. So my journey continues, and I'm going to set out to right the wrong. I'm really determined to place women back into history. We are currently in development and begun filming a documentary film that we called Women's Work, The Untold Story of America's Female Farmers. That website there is where you can find the trailer. If we have time, I can show it to you. Let's see here. And if you want to follow along with the stories, here is my social media. I also have a podcast, as I mentioned, one with Barbara Rader, so you can actually hear her if you want today and listen to the podcast later. And you can sign up for our newsletter on our website at femalefarmerproject.org, where we try on a bi-monthly basis to curate interesting articles and podcasts and information that we think you might want to know. So I think we can all agree that our constituents, the female farmer, are the 1% of Americans that are still farming. And this is real talk. They are facing enormous socio-political and economic challenges, in part because of policies that have been implemented by leaders without strong ties to farming. Farmers' stories can demonstrate the many issues that threaten farming: access to farmland, a decrease in water supply, an increase in weather catastrophes, and the rise of suicide among our agricultural workers. It is only by listening to stories from those on the front lines of food production that the community at large can begin to envision and understand the policy changes and the preservation of farmland that is necessary to support our farmers. So I'm hoping that I'm sending you away inspired, empowered, and ready to help farmers tell their stories. And please let me know how I can help.
Great. Thank you so much, Audra. That was fascinating and beautiful photography for somebody who had, what did you say, a 15-minute lesson?
I picked up a camera 5 years ago. So thank you. Yeah.
Well, I think you found your calling in storytelling.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions? You want me to take questions? We have time?
We have some time for some questions. I've put out a call. I'm not seeing anything right now. I guess I would just say my question would be sort of like, so what's next for you? What's coming up in the coming year?
I am working on funding the film. Fundraising is, as you know, it's a bear. And so, and doing agriculture storytelling is very difficult to get on broadcast and mainstream media, but we've had some successes, as I showed you, and I've had some successes in legislature as well. I was able to help pass legislation here in Washington State that helps fund mental health resources for agricultural workers in both English and Spanish, and we were able to get similar legislation into the Farm Bill, and it was passed in the Farm Bill and fully funded to get mental health resources for our farm workers and farmers across the nation. So we're really super proud that we've had legislative success as well as success in the media, sort of mainstream media, because oftentimes you'll see a lot of this just happening in a bubble. And I really just wanted to reach out to the people who are curious about who's growing their food and get them to understand the real challenges that these women are facing. Well, all farmers are facing, but in particular women.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple questions now. How did you come into contact with these women? Were they part of an organization or group? Did they contact you? Did you contact them?
In the very beginning, I went through every single, if I was going to be in a town, I would look up that farmer's market, look up every single person that was listed on the farmer's market website, and then go to their website to see who was farming there. And if it was a woman, then I would contact her. So it was a lot of research in the beginning to find, because there was no database. I've now built a beautiful database, which is great. I've had over 500 women nominate themselves to be part of the film or the Female Farmer Project. It was just a terrific sort of, referrals or, researching through websites. Lots of different ways in the beginning. Now, women, we've got enough sort of saturation, and women, for the most part, know about us and nominate themselves.
That's great. I was struck by how many. I was talking on the first day about sort of the influx in agriculture of sort of what we call the career changers, the women who are in their 40s and 50s and have had careers largely in education and healthcare and corporate America, and who are coming back to the farm now. And I was excited
Yes.
to see that you had highlighted a number of
Yeah.
those women.
Well, and that's what really, in the very beginning intrigued me, because why would these women, have this encore career in such an incredibly hard job? I mean, it's
Exactly. Yeah.
so
Yep.
hard.
Where the likelihood
Why?
of getting rich is
Why?
small.
So, that was like such an intriguing idea to me, that there had to be something there. And so that was, I just wanted to dig and figure
Yeah.
that out.
Yeah.
Oh, I
It
should share
is.
my shirt. Let's see if I can back up so you guys can see it. This is a shirt. If you look on social media and tag "This is women's work," you'll see a lot of the women around the world wearing that shirt. That's the shirt that helps us fund the film, the production of the film.
Awesome. Awesome. Let's see. We've got, do you do live presentations, and how could somebody work with you to get your stories told in our area?
I do. I have traveled around the world trying to bring these stories to life on stage. Um, I have decided to take sort of the first half of this year off from that so that I can really focus on fundraising for the film, because
And look
it's
at,
so
here you are
important. I'm
on
tapping into it,
January
Mary.
31st. That was a good resolution.
I'm so weak.
I promise I am not going to bother you again
No,
for the first half of
it,
this
it,
year.
it's a hard thing to fill Barbara Rader's shoes, and I am honored to just try to help a little bit. So,
Well, I think you did a delightful job in a very different way. I think stories are always a really good way to introduce data, and Barbara is going to give us, I hope,
right.
a whole lot of data which will help flesh
Well, I
out
have
the
to be
skeleton
honest.
a little
Yeah,
more.
it's interesting. One of my first asked to speak was to come to Washington, D.C. and speak at George Washington University. And when I looked at the agenda, everybody on the list was, high level government, like, ambassadors to Africa, or had a PhD at the end of their name. These were very accomplished women. And I was like, why did they invite the photographer? I just don't understand. I was really feeling very insecure until I got there and I saw the presentations. I was like, oh,
Context.
it's not that interesting to look at pie charts when we're talking about women.
Right.
We
Ever,
need to know who we're talking about.
yeah, yeah, the
So
backstory.
yeah, it's really important for me to sort of, one of my end goals for the Female Farmer Project is to donate the whole thing to the Library of Congress, so that those images become part of the public domain.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I hope someday that there are little vignettes that are part of the census, so that when you go to the NAS census, there are actually little snippets of farmers telling their story. But
Yeah, they're working very hard at that.
yeah,
It's interesting. I went to a farm and they said, "Oh, the USDA was just here," and they said, "We're trying to do storytelling like the Female Farmer Project." And she said, "That is so funny because she's coming in 2 days." So I'm very proud that I've inspired other people to continue to storytell, because that has been entirely the goal. I have self-funded this by myself. It's, people would call it a passion project. I call it my purpose.
excellent. Good way to do it. So let me just say thank you again to Audra, and for
Thank
sharing
you,
your beautiful
everyone.
stories. And we will definitely have your information and links to your sites on the website so people can follow up.
Reach out.
And
Please do.
everybody else, you've got 9 minutes to stretch, refill that coffee
Hydrate.
mug,
Stay
hydrate,
warm.
and then we will be back to talk to Erin about legal issues.
Thanks, Mary.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.